Hello, my name is Claire Mitchell and I'm the curator here at Southampton City Art Gallery. We're currently standing in the main hall, which is the main entrance to the gallery, but we do have two wings as well, which gives us the opportunity to rotate our collection, bringing in new exhibitions, plus also showcasing some of our collection here as well. We started here many years ago, back in 1911, by a bequest that was given to the city by Robert Chipperfield, who was a councillor for the city, and he gave us a collection of some of the paintings that he was acquiring during his life, plus a small amount of money, which has allowed us to build that collection and also this amazing gallery as well. It wasn't just Chipperfield, we also received a bequest fund from another councillor called Frederick William Smith, who again left us a legacy of a trust fund which allowed us to purchase paintings for the collection. And this has continued throughout our history until we have now got the collection that we have now. I'm now going to hand you over to Kate and Liza from our learning team, who are going to sort of showcase some of the collection that we have within our main hall and within our galleries, just so you can get to know it a lot better.
Hello, my name's Kate and I'm going to be telling you a little bit about some of the artworks we have on display in the gallery at the moment. Here at Southampton City Art Gallery, we have a wide range of historic and contemporary portraits. Now, what do I mean when I use the term portrait? At its most simple, a portrait is a picture of a person. So why would an artist choose to paint one? What reasons can you think of? Well, an artist might be paid, might be commissioned to paint the portrait of someone who was rich or famous or important. They might choose to paint a loved one to help them remember them. Or they might simply be really interested in the colours and the shapes and the lines that they see. Now, what we're going to do now is to use some of the clues in the painting beside me to discover a little bit more about the person who is being shown to us. So right at first glance, we can see that this is someone important, someone regal. We can tell by the red velvet of the cloak, the ermine, fur lining and trim, and the absolutely gorgeous satin and gold embroidery. If you look at his shoes, you can see straight away that these are not very practical shoes, and you probably wouldn't be wearing them going about your daily business. Looking at his head, you can see a circlet of leaves reminiscent of those worn by the emperors of Rome. If you're after some more clues, you can also see around his neck a chain made up of, can you see which animal? If you can't quite make it out, look at the top of his staff and you can see there perched an eagle. And the eagle is there on his chains and on his staff to represent France. Still need more clues? You can actually see the letter for the beginning of his name more than once in this painting. Have a good look and see how many times you can spot it. Here, in the centre of his throne, and here, in the hem of the cloak, and here, on the side of the cloak, you can see 3 times depicted the letter N. Now, should I still need further information, there's somewhere very helpful I can look. Each of the artworks at the gallery is accompanied by a label, and we can see here some more information. At the top of the label, it says Baron Francois Gerard. Now, that's not the name of the person in the painting, that's the name of the artist himself. And next to that name are 2 dates, 1770 to 1837. What do those dates mean? The year he was born and then the year that he died. Underneath, we have the title of the piece, which is Napoleon, showing us that this is the self-styled Emperor of France, Napoleon, who modelled himself on the emperors of ancient Rome, hence the circlet of leaves you can see on his head. Underneath that, there are 3 words, oil on canvas. And that's where in the label it tells us which materials were used to create the artwork. So we're seeing that this has been done using oil paint, which is a lovely gooey paint that stays wet for a long time, so it's easy to work with. And it's been done on canvas. Canvas is a kind of material. It's been stretched out over a wooden frame, and then it's been nailed around the frame so that it's ready to paint on. Now, before we move on and go and look at another portrait, there are some other objects in this painting you might have spotted and you might be interested in knowing more about. Firstly, look under his arm, tucked into a sash, is a bejewelled sword. You can see the blade there hanging down next to his cloak. That shows us that as well as being an emperor, Napoleon was also a military leader, and we can see that represented by the sword. Over here on this lovely blue cushion, can you see the orb with the cross? What might the cross represent? Well, the cross is there to show us that as well as being their military leader, he was also responsible for the church in France. Slightly harder to read is this strange white hand. Can you see it? Attached to a wooden pole. What might that be for? Is it a back scratcher? Is it for smacking people or tapping people or pointing? We get all sorts of answers when we ask that question. It is in fact the hand of justice, showing us that Napoleon was not only responsible for the armies and for the church, but also for the justice system in France. We talked right at the beginning about the different reasons that artists have for creating portraits. This was a commission, and Gerard did not paint just one like this. He in fact painted 10. And the reason for that was that these paintings were commissioned by Napoleon to accompany the day in 1804 when he was made emperor, when he was coronated. Of course, in 1804, there were no televisions, no newspapers, no internet, and so people would have been unable to see his picture in any other way. And for that reason, paintings like this were hung at almost every town hall in France. So no matter how important you were, no matter how low you might be in the social structure in France, you would know what your emperor looked like and how important he was. So now we're going to explore a different kind of portrait. But before we do, I'd just like you to take a minute to think about, how is this similar to, how is it the same as the Napoleon we just looked at? And how is it different? Well, they're both portraits, aren't they? They're both pictures of people. They're both of men. And they've both been created using paint. They're both paintings. And I think that's where the similarities end. If you want to look at differences, let's start with the background. Here you have a lovely, vibrant, bright pink. But you don't have the orb, you don't have the stool, the throne, the drapes, the carpet, any of the objects which in the painting of Napoleon serve to set the scene. What about the style? I think you'll agree, looking at this, that it is much less detailed, much more cartoon-like. If you look at the colour palette that's been used, you could probably count the colours in this painting on your hands. If you tried to do that with Napoleon, it would be impossible. They've used a very, very broad colour palette with lots and lots of different shades in order to make it look truly realistic. And it could, in fact, almost be a photograph. How else is it different? Remember the Napoleon? Painted using oil on canvas. Let's have a look at what this is painted on. If you look closely, you can see it has in fact been painted directly onto the wall, which has implications for taking it down. We can't take it down, and it has to be painted over in white paint, and it takes several coats. What about putting the portrait back up again? Yeah, that's right. It has to be painted again from scratch. And that's where I'm going to talk about how we own this artwork. This is painted over, and then it's painted again. So we do not own this physical painting. What we own instead is a digital black and white image. And a projector is placed here in the gallery, and it projects the black and white image onto the wall. Our exhibitions team then trace that image with a pencil, and then the next job is to add the colour. And aside from the digital image, what we also own is a list of colours. But the colours we own are not pink, green, red. They're what are known as Pantone numbers. They're absolutely specific colour references. So each colour has to be exactly that the artist intended. Speaking of the artists, we can find out a little bit more about them if again we look at the label. And interestingly, here you can see not one name, but two. Simon Grennan and Christopher Sperandio. And next to their names, there's only one date each, 1965 and 1964, which tells me that they are in fact living artists. The next line tells us the title of the piece, and the title of this piece is Hakeem, and it was created in 2000. Remember we talked about why an artist would paint a portrait. Why did they choose to paint Hakeem? I don't know. We can tell from the objects in Gerard's painting that he's showing us Napoleon. Who is Hakeem? I don't know, but I'd like to invite you, as I invite our visitors to the gallery, to make up your own stories about who he might be and why they might have chosen to paint him. So now we've moved on from portraits and we are looking at a landscape, by which I mean it's a picture of the land. What do you think you'd call a painting of the sea? What would you call a painting of a city? Yeah, absolutely right. You've got seascapes and you've got cityscapes. And when I'm looking at a landscape, I find it useful to divide the artwork into sections. Think about which part of the painting is furthest away. It's the part at the top, isn't it? Which is what we call the background. Which part's closest to you? Which part are you, the viewer, invited to stand in? It's the bottom, and that's what we would call the foreground. And then the section in the middle, you've guessed it, is called the middle ground. This is an artwork by a very famous painter, and the painter's name is Claude Monet, and he was working in the late 1800s in France and was one of a group of artists who were known as the Impressionists. Up until then, the artwork in Europe had been a lot more like the Napoleon that we looked at earlier, a lot more realistic, almost like a photograph, as we said before. And then you had this group of artists who, rather than trying to create an exact replica of what they were looking at, were very clearly just creating an impression. And if you imagine yourself holding a paintbrush, have a think about how you would use it. What kind of marks would you be making on the canvas? And what you'll come up with is probably a lot of these kind of sharp, flicky movements. Let's have a look at the content of Monet's painting. It's a church, and you can see the church spire at the topmost point of the painting. Underneath that we can see the roofs of the houses, we can see the trees. And then things start to change a bit, because here, this line is the edge of the water. And you can see the green paint flicks here are the trees reflected. See the terracotta pinks and creams. There's the roofs reflected. And right here at the bottom, the mirror image of the church. So where would Monet have stood to paint an artwork like this? Well, I don't know if this is what he was standing on to paint the church, but I know that he had made a pontoon, a floating platform on which he kept his easel and his paints, and he would anchor the pontoon in the river so that he could draw the land from the water. Hang on to that idea of those paint flicks that are so typical of the Impressionist painters, because we're going to look at a modern work of art which links in now. So here we are at another landscape, and you can probably see by comparing it to the size of me that this is on a much larger scale, and this work is unframed. I don't think we looked at the label on the Monet, but here, as with the Monet, it is also an oil on canvas, and it is a landscape. In the background, the sky and the mountains. In the middle ground, more mountains, and in the foreground, you can see the spikes of the trees. And normally when I show children this artwork, the first thing they want to say to me is that it looks just like Minecraft. When I ask them what that means, they point out that it's very pixelated. The pixels are the individual parts of a photograph, a computer image, and when that image is enlarged, especially if it's not very good quality, you will get these pixels, these squares. But this isn't a photograph. We know that this is oil on canvas, and it's by an artist called Dan Hayes. Why has he chosen to individually, painstakingly paint these pixels? Well, I'm going to take you back to where this artwork comes from. Dan Hayes searched on the internet for his own name. And when he searched it, apparently, this is how the story goes, he didn't just find out about himself, he found out about another Dan Hayes who lived in America. And this other Dan Hayes had lots of pictures, lots of slightly pixelated pictures, I believe, of the Colorado landscape. Dan Hayes, the artist, decided to recreate them painstakingly. And if we look at the title of this work is Colorado Impressions number 12A. I think it's possible to see the individual pixels in this artwork in the same way as those individual flicks of paint in the Monet, and Impressionism for the 21st century. So we've been examining and exploring the artworks in the gallery in pairs, and this is going to be our final stop. We've looked at portraits, we've looked at landscapes, and now we're going to be looking at two sculptures that are part of our collection. So to my right, I have a sculpture by an artist called Auguste Rodin. Rodin was working at the same time as Monet in the late 1800s, and depicted here we can see a female figure. It's a naked female figure, and from her body language, it looks as if she's trying to cover her face, to hide herself from something, trying to cover herself up, as if she's frightened, as if she's trying to protect herself. If I look at the label again, I can see that this is a character from a biblical story, and it is in fact Eve. Rodin's showing us Eve at the moment after she has eaten the apple from the tree of knowledge, when she has realised that she and Adam are going to be expelled from the Garden of Eden forever. How did Rodin make this sculpture? It's made from bronze, and the bronze would have been heated up until it became a liquid and then poured. How does it not end up as a puddle on the floor? Yeah, he needs a mould. And in order to make the mould, he would have started by creating a wire armature, like a skeleton. And that skeleton would then have been wrapped in clay. Okay, so that would be his original model. From the model, he then would have made a mould, and she would have been cast from bronze in two halves, a bit like a chocolate Easter egg, and then put together. And if I were to turn her on her side, which I'm not going to do for obvious reasons, and you were to look up inside, you would see that she is actually completely hollow. To my left, I've got a piece by Antony Gormley. It was made in 1983, and Antony Gormley is a very well-known living artist. It's also made from metal. It's not made from bronze, it's made from lead and also fiberglass. And whereas we see Eve full of emotion, we see here a very neutral figure, and the figure is standing on a diving board and looks, as if he's about to dive into a swimming pool. Do you remember with Eve, we talked about the original model being made from clay? Well, Antony Gormley doesn't use a clay model as his starting point. For this sculpture, he's actually used himself. And so rather than making the model out of clay, he would stand in the position he wants his sculpture to finish at. And this is where he needs a bit of an assistance. So his assistants would come and, to protect his skin, first of all, wrap him in cling film. Over the top of the cling film, he would then be wrapped in plaster bandages, a bit like if you break an arm or a leg. And the plaster bandages are malleable when they're wet, and then as they dry, they go hard. So he would be wrapped very quickly in the position he was in. Now, I am told that there's a bit of a problem with this, and the problem is, as you can imagine, how he breathes. And in order that he can breathe, I'm told this is true, a straw would be inserted into each nostril for him to breathe through. And then he has to stand like that until the plaster dries. After that, he'd be cut out very, very carefully, and those plaster cutouts would form the basis of the moulds to shape the lead sections, which are then reassembled to make the sculpture as a whole. If you look at these join lines, you can see straight away that they're raised and that they're a different colour. Now, the artist could have hidden these. He could have filed them down, he could have disguised them and made them part of the sculpture. And what I'd like you to think about is why he's chosen to leave them showing. I don't know the answer to that question. There's certainly not a right or a wrong answer, but I think it's interesting for us to think about. I've got one more thing to show you. So Eve is here in pride of place in the art gallery, but that's not always been the case. When I was a little girl, her place was outside by the fountain, by the entrance to the art gallery, and obviously we chose to bring her in to protect her from vandalism, from the weather, from all kinds of things. Gormley, also inside in the gallery in pride of place, but I thought it would be interesting for you to see some other Gormley sculptures. Here they are, in the sea on a beach near Liverpool, and these sculptures live outside permanently. What's going to happen to a sculpture that's based outside? Well, let's have a look. You can see here that as well as Gormley, there is a second artist at work, and that artist is the sea. And the sea has left these strange figures covered in barnacles and seaweed. And I think if they were left even longer, then they'd change even more. Thank you very much for listening to me. I hope you've enjoyed exploring some of the artwork we have here at the art gallery. As well as looking at paintings and looking at sculptures, I think it's pretty fun to have a go at making your own. And if you hold on a moment, my colleague Lisa Morgan's going to be here to show you some of the fantastic ideas she's got for art inspired by the works on display here in the gallery.
Hello, I'm Lisa. I'm part of the learning team here at Southampton Art Gallery, and I'm going to take you on a little look around some of my favourite artworks. And these are artworks that I think will be really good to inspire you to make some of your own artwork at home. There's no right or wrong. Art is a bit like music. People like different types of artwork, but it's all really, really interesting. So why not have a play at home, inspired by some of our works, and see what you can come up with. Off we go. The work is by an artist called Nevinson, and it's called Loading Timber at Southampton Docks. It was painted in 1917, which was a time when there was lots of change going on. New machinery, and a load of artists called the Futurists got really inspired by this. Nevinson was actually a vorticist, which is a group of artists inspired by the Futurists who lived here in England. This art would be great for doing something similar at home. Why don't you have a look on YouTube or other online videos and find things like maybe cars or fast moving machinery, things that are really dynamic. It might be that you look for dynamism in the natural world. Have a look at videos of animals. There are some great films out there that you can watch to see things moving at speed. In this artwork, Nevinson has used the angles here of the metal or timber, the timber that the little men in the picture are loading onto the ship. And you can see he's used the way they go up and down like this, and all the different lines of the cranes to create movement in the picture. Why don't you try creating a picture at home? Maybe using pictures of boats. You could look at Southampton docks and research some of the activity that happens down there. And you could use pastels or pencils or pens to draw your own ideas. Try incorporating the lines though, because these are really nice for creating shapes and also distance into the artwork. Right, this artwork is by an artist called Jean-Louis Forain, and it's called The Fisherman. Forain was an impressionist artist, and they were in France, and it was created in 1884. The reason I picked this one, and I think it's interesting, is the angles, the perspective in the artwork. Look how the bridge leads your eye down here to the sun. Also, you can see the horizon goes along to meet the bridge. Here, the platform on which the fisherman's sitting draws your eye into the middle of the artwork. Why don't you at home think about a picture that you might want to create? You might have a family pet at home that you could incorporate into the artwork here. Impressionists love to paint outside. If you've got the opportunity to look out of a window or go into your garden or maybe sit on your balcony, why don't you try painting what's going on outside your house? If you haven't got paints, you could use pastels or pencil to create an artwork that explores nature. Think about the different tones and shades that you can see. Look at the different colours that Forain has used here. There's the water down below, he's got the reflection in the water, and also the beautiful sun here with yellows going up into the clouds. Have a real close look at the colours around you. You don't have to go outside to do this, you could do this inside as well. And if you haven't got anything around you to inspire you, have a look in magazines or have a look online. There will be lots of different impressionist artists' work that you can look at to get ideas. One of our really famous artworks at the gallery is called Leaping Hare, and it's by an artist called Barry Flanagan. It was created in 1981, and it's a beautiful leaping hare on a wooden stand. This stand is really interesting to me because it's made out of stacked up items. Why don't you think about making something out of the things around you at home? You might have Lego at home, or another kind of game where you can make things out of blocks and bricks. You could create different kinds of plinths. That's what this is called, that the sculpture sits on, and make your own sculptures to sit on top of those plinths. You might have Play-Doh at home. If you haven't got Play-Doh, you could have some fun with your stuffed toys. Why don't you think about building different bases for your toys and making some contemporary artworks by placing them on top? The leaping hare here that Barry Flanagan's made is almost like it's flying through the air. You might have a unicorn or a dragon at home that you could make fly through the air. This sculpture here is Rodin's Eve. And Rodin's a very famous sculptor, and here he's portrayed Eve from the Bible, and she is, as you can see, posing like this. She's naked, she's got no clothes on, which sometimes people do find a bit funny, children, when they come to the gallery. But the artist is using that to show you that she's in a vulnerable position. She's feeling scared and upset. Why don't you think about, if you've got Play-Doh or clay at home, making some figures of your own? Think about the positions you're putting them in. You could do sitting figures, standing figures. You might have figures that are in action, maybe some sporting ones, kicking a football. Have a think about the things that you could do. If you haven't got Play-Doh or clay at home, you might have action figures, you might have dolls. Why don't you think about creating your own story out of them? You could take different photos of them, create your own storyboard. There's lots of ideas that you could use. If you don't want to make a sculpture, why don't you, if you've got an adult at home or a brother or a sister or a family member that you could work with, you could take it in turns to do different poses for each other. You could do sitting poses or standing poses and take turns to draw each other and really practice your skills at drawing the figure. Generally, a rule we have in art is, as an adult, your head fits into your total body about 7 times. Have a look online, because there are lots of really good ideas for folding paper and drawing grids on paper to help you get the proportions of the body right. Right, this artwork here is one of our more modern artworks in the collection. It was created by an artist called Dan Hayes in 2002, and it's a part of a series of artworks. It's an interesting one because Dan Hayes didn't actually go to Colorado and take this picture himself. He used a website where he sourced the material, so he found the pictures online and then he printed them out, blew them up and painted the artworks from those internet pictures. You might have your own photos at home that you could expand so that they become pixelated. You could print them out in black and white maybe and colour over them in different tones. You could also collage them. So if you've got pictures at home that you could chop up, or magazines that you could cut up, you might have papers at home, you could cut them up into little squares and use them to make your own picture. Why not find something in a magazine or a book that you really like? Maybe, I don't know, a picture of the sea or something else out in nature, maybe a nice landscape, and you could look at the small image and then use your collage pieces to make it a much bigger version that almost looks pixelated, like this one we have here.